Welcome to the Brute Strength Podcast, bringing you worldwide experts from all areas of health and fitness. We cover training, nutrition, coaching, and mindset. Welcome your host, strength and conditioning coach, 2012 and 2013 CrossFit Games champ, Michael Cazayoux. Mind, body, brute.
Hey guys, welcome back. This is Mike Cazayoux, and you're listening to the Brute Strength Podcast. This week's guest is Brian St. Pierre. Brian works for a company called Precision Nutrition. You guys have heard me interview Dr. John Berardi a couple times. He's the co-founder of PN, and his first episode is our most downloaded episode ever at over 100,000 downloads. John reached out to me a few months ago and introduced me to Brian, saying, "You've got to have this guy on your show. He's incredible." And he did not disappoint. Brian is not only an amazing human being, but he sees nutrition coaching through a different lens than almost anyone I've ever met. So we start the show off by talking about the time he passed up sex for leg day. That's a great story. We talk about him flunking out of engineering school before getting into nutrition. We talk about an article that he wrote years ago for PN called The Cost of Getting Lean, which went on to become the most viewed page on the whole website, and it's had over 1 million views. So we dive into the major takeaways from that topic that obviously people just loved so much. We talk a lot about different mindset shifts for people in terms of their relationship to food as well as dieting. And we finish with a lot of talk about the art of coaching and how PN, one of the world's leaders in nutrition coaching, is working with athletes and average Joes and Janes in a different way than most others. This one is one of those where I walked away with just feeling like I had a ton of knowledge bombs. And usually when that happens, you guys give me great feedback and you feel the same way. So I know you're going to love this show. Before we get started, I would really appreciate this if you would share it with a friend. And if you feel so inclined, leave me a quick review on iTunes. Enjoy the show. Brian, thanks for joining me today, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm really looking forward to it.
So tell me about passing up sex because you had leg day.
Okay, yeah. So this is a story that I intentionally didn't tell for a long time. But then one time I told JB, or Dr. John Berardi at PN, I told him this story a couple of years ago. So we were just having like a personal conversation about mistakes we made when we were younger in our fitness journey, and I was like, mentioned a time when I was dating someone, and she flat out pretty much offered like, "Hey, let's go, do whatever." And I was like, no, I can't. I got a squat. I have leg day in a few hours. And you think about it now and you're like, how short-sighted is that to pass up like a nice personal experience with another human being, right, for leg day because I needed to squat. So I tell him this in confidence, and like we legitimately did a podcast together. It's either the next day or later on that day. And he told that story on the podcast. And I was like, dude, JB, man, come on. But now I'm at a point where it's like, you know what? Other people can learn from my mistakes. So yeah, don't pass up opportunities like that. I mean, part of that was because I lifted to get better at lifting, right? Like I was squatting because I wanted to get better at squatting. When you think about most people you work with, that's not their intention when they go to the gym, right? They're exercising, they're trying to get more fit to do other things in their lives differently or better, to go out and be with their kids, go hiking, whatever their passion or their joy or multiple areas of their life. It's generally not because they want to get better at exercising. So I think we can get too far down that path as fitness professionals and like pass up life experiences because I need to get better at exercising. Now, if I was getting paid for it, that'd have been one thing. I was not getting paid for my exercise performance, right? So it's a lesson that took me a long time to learn, but I wish I could tell my younger self that 15 years ago, right?
You were harnessing your chi.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want it to possibly negatively impact. If I lost 5 pounds on my lift that day, I was going to be pissed.
So I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think your fitness journey started with your dad. He was really overweight, not extremely overweight, but he had a good bit of weight to lose, and he really took ownership of his overall health, and he did it. He lost weight and he became a healthier person. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. So basically, I mean, when I was young, like really young, probably like 4 or 5, my dad, and before I was born, my dad was like lifted and exercised, was fit, like a muscular guy. And then he had kids and had 2 businesses with my mom. And, they had a lot of stuff going on. And slowly over time, like lifestyles changed, weight crept on. So when I was in 8th grade, so you're talking way back in like 98. Wow, 21 years ago. That makes me feel old. He he didn't talk about it, but he essentially decided he wanted to change. Like, he's not a tall guy. I mean, I come from a small French family, right? My dad's like 5'7" tops, but he was like a $195 and unhappy with it. So he and my mom just kind of made some quiet changes to their eating routine, our family eating routine. They didn't really talk about it, say much of anything about it, but I was old enough where I started to pick up on it, became a little less oblivious to like the day-to-day aspects of family life. And yeah, he lost like about 30 pounds down to like 160, 165, and he's been there ever since. Right. And he's now in his late 50s and still maintains that body weight. And not that he's like hyper obsessed with his weight, because it was about more than that. It was about just feeling better, performing better. Right. He had stopped exercising for years at that point. So exercise in various forms has been a part of his life ever since, which has helped with his golf game, helped with his men's league hockey. So we saw all kinds of other benefits, right, to improving his fitness. He ate better. I'd say my parents probably had a better relationship with food by the way they went about it, right? It wasn't like this, oh, we're doing a diet. Oh, we're doing low carb. No, it was just, they just started making better choices and just being a little bit more aware. It was nothing overly dramatic. And I've talked to him about it since, and he's aware of his intake and he's conscious of eating well, but not to the point of it actually causing its own other problems. Yeah. But it led to an increased focus on being more active. My parents started biking a lot when I was a little bit older, but it all kind of segued from that initial start at that point in his life. Yeah, way back when I was in 8th grade, man. So, and I noticed that. But I didn't notice that at the time. It was probably a few years later. I kind of looked back and, like, in retrospect, was like, huh. So I started, and I was in high school. I was an athlete. So I wanted to start eating better and training. So I just talked to my dad because he had been lifting again since then and had been. And I remembered him being a big lifter when I was younger. So that kind of kicked off. Actually, like a year later, freshman year of high school, I started training, and I've been training ever since. So it kind of just initiated my interest in the idea of like doing things to improve my body, improve my performance, improve my health. And I've been on that path, in various directions ever since.
But you didn't immediately get into fitness as a career, right? You started college in the engineering program. What happened there?
Many things. So yeah, I mean, I come from a family of a lot of engineers. Like on my mom's side, I have 7. They're all male cousins. Actually, I have 7 male cousins who are all engineers. All right, 3 of them are all within a year of me. So there was 4 of us, 4 boys that were all like the same age. We would raise hell, but we all went into engineering. The other 3 are all engineers. I was the only one who ended up deciding, like, yeah, this isn't for me. And I mean, I was good at math. I was good at science. We all were. That's how we all went into it as a field. But ultimately, like after 3 years of like, felt like I was slamming my head against a wall, right? Like I just could not get myself to care about the material. Right. So I spent more time reading about training and nutrition. I was reading on bodybuilding.com way back in the day in college, reading, T-Nation, JohnBerardi.com before he even had Precision Nutrition. I was reading Muscle Link, if you remember. Science Link is actually what his company was called. So, reading all that kind of stuff. Planning my life around my training, at school, rather than actually doing my engineering work. So I was actually, after my junior year, about halfway through my junior year. No, after my junior year, sorry. I was asked to leave the engineering program because I had done poorly. And, and I had been a high-level student in high school. So that was humbling, to say the least, embarrassing. So, of course, I still had too much pride, and I came back that first semester back when I came back to school as an engineering major. Still sucked. Still couldn't get myself to care. So then I met with the nutrition advisor, nutrition individual kind of in charge of the program, and said I wanted to switch into nutrition. Basically had a whole long talk about it, but my caveat was I've already been in college for 3 years, right? Like I need to get this show on the road. So like if I'll do this, if I can have it done in 2 years, so I have a 5-year total undergrad. She was like, done, we can make that happen. They mainly because I was lucky that they just wanted men in the program. Right? It's in the dietetics field, it's mostly women. So I was fortunate in that regard. It was like they want diversity, and that means men, which is not something you hear, especially coming from engineering, where it was the exact opposite. Right? It was like all dudes, very few women. So they basically let me, move around a whole bunch of prereqs and get into nutrition, and I crushed it because I cared. I found it interesting, and I did a lot of reading on my own outside of my own assigned work, and it was something that really kind of jazzed me. So that made a huge, huge difference. And I think it's kind of cliche when you hear that, follow your passion. I think that's just a soundbite that sounds really good. Doesn't always work out quite that way. Right. But fortunately for me, it kind of worked out that way and led me to where I am now. But it was through a lot of trial and error, I can tell you that. So yeah, that was a learning experience for me, being asked to leave the engineering program, take a semester break from school. And then when I did finally decide about halfway through that semester back to switch to nutrition, and I never looked back. It was my grades were night and day. My desire to learn was night and day. It was awesome once I did it. But it took a little bit of time. I was a slow learner.
Tell me about the decision to go from majoring in something that's traditionally very prestigious and high paying to something that's traditionally not very prestigious or high paying. So internally, as well as like your family dynamic. Some of that.
Oh yeah, without question, man. Right. Like my freshman year, I had people that, had just met me saying, oh man, you should totally go into nutrition. This is clearly like what you care about. I was talking to people about nutrition and training. So they were really trying to push me that way. And I was like, no, man, you don't make any money in nutrition. I'd look up the average pay of a dietitian versus the average pay of an engineer. And it was night and day. It was like twice as much money to be an engineer. So I was like, why would I make that switch? Yeah, this is a hobby. That's going to be my career. So I just kind of had this fixed mindset on it. And when I finally decided to make the switch, I'd say my parents were a little more, they were supportive, but maybe leery isn't quite the right word, but just maybe concerned, right? They wanted me to do what would make me happy, and they knew that I wasn't into it, right? They'd seen me go from being an excellent high school student to a struggling college student. And so but I think my parents were like, a little more hesitant, like, man, is this really the direction you want to go? But at the same time, they still supported me. They still helped me with my process. And yeah, so we went for it from there. And where it got really interesting was when I interned for free, right? When I was doing my internship at Cressy Sports Performance, and you're not paid. And my parents were like, you're doing what? Right, you're interning at an up-and-coming gym for free? Right, you were going to be an engineer, and now you're an unpaid intern. So I think that was in the strength and conditioning world, which is not something they were overly familiar with, right? So I think they were like, wow, okay. I mean, ultimately, like they knew I was an autonomous adult, and it was my decision to make and my mistake to make if it backfired. They would give me feedback and input when I would ask for it, but ultimately, allowed me to forge my own path and see if I was actually making good decisions. And fortunately, it all worked out.
So let's talk about your mindset personally in terms of fitness and nutrition at that point. I know there's a story about you taking potatoes out of your wife's studio out recently.
So I was actually, I was working at Cressy Sports Performance at that point. And I was definitely still really into like more complex dietary approaches, right? I mean, this had been like my thing for years, like training and nutrition. So I just went like further and further and further down that road. What can help me make progress at this point? So I used like PN's older post-workout anytime approach, which was, meals around training, you had carbs. Meals further away from training were definitely lower on the carb spectrum, mostly protein, veggies, and fats. So I followed that approach. And so, yeah, she wasn't my wife then. She's my wife now. She was a girlfriend I had dated off and on for years, and we were just getting back together, like seriously getting back together as like actual adults. Um, so it felt a little different this time. And so I'm going down to her apartment. She's making dinner. She works in this nice beef stew for like 4 hours, right? I mean, it's a great meal. It's got protein, it's got the potatoes, tons of veggies. It's filling. It's not super calorie dense, like just delicious, but it takes time to make. So she, works on it hard for most of the day. I come down. She actually portioned it out. We're sitting down to eat, and I'm like looking down at the bowl, not looking at her, and I'm legitimately pulling the potatoes out of the stew, right? And I just happened to notice, like, it kind of just got quiet, like that unnatural quiet where you're like, the hairs in the back of your neck stand up, like, oh shit, so something's not quite right. So I just kind of look up, and she's just looking at me like, what are you doing? And then she legitimately said, like, why are you taking the potatoes out? I'm like, well, kind of like awkwardly stumbling, trying to explain, well, I didn't just work out, so I, really shouldn't be having any carbs. And she's like, it's like half a potato, maybe a whole potato at most in your entire bowl, right? And that would really be pushing it. And I'm like, okay. So I just like, start putting them back in, because I wanted to be like a gracious guest and a gracious boyfriend. And I ate them. And afterwards, time had passed, and I thought back, like, nothing bad happened. I didn't gain any extra body fat from having a half a potato, not around my workout. And so I started to just kind of experiment and explore that a little bit. What if I just had some carbs at other times in reasonable amounts? And lo and behold, it made no difference to my body composition. I was eating the same amount, just spread out differently. But it allowed me to have like more like quote unquote normal meals, like a sandwich, right? Like, or a wrap, or toast with my eggs, or whatever you might think of as like a more typical socially acceptable meal. And then I was working with my clients, we started experimenting with it too, and they loved it because for that exact reason, right? They got to eat quote unquote more normal meals, or they'd have meals with their kids or their family and didn't have to be the one, taking something out or putting something extra in to meet these kind of arbitrary rules. And they loved it, and it didn't impact their results negatively in any way. And in fact, for some, because they felt like they could do it more consistently, they got better results. So ultimately, what was a pretty uncomfortable moment led to like, maybe not quite an aha moment, but this is something worth exploring, and let's just see where it takes me. And then you look at the research, and I started digging into the research more at that time, and it kind of showed the same thing. In general, it doesn't matter. Per person on an individual basis, of course it can matter.
What is it?
Like carb timing, nutrient timing, like all these fancy protocols. For super advanced individuals, yes, every little edge can matter. For the vast majority of us, the vast majority of our clients, it is so far from your first intervention to consider. It's super far down the list. And that was a learning experience for me. That I still think back to this day, because it was like a big shift in how I coached.
So then you've gone on to join the PN team, and you have authored or co-authored a shitload of content. And one of those pieces of content is, I think, the most viewed page on the entire site, which is the cost of getting lean. What's the gist of that article?
So the gist of that article, it really generated from a conversation I was having with some other PN team members, like a handful of years ago now. We were at like our annual team gathering, and it was like me, our designer, Carm, and our CEO at the time, like Phil. We were sitting at lunch, and Carm was doing our PN coaching program, and had made some great progress. He had lost some weight. He was feeling awesome, more energy, sleeping better. And he made a comment like, "Oh, if I just keep doing this, like, I'm gonna be like jacked by the end, like gaining more muscle, losing some fat." And I was like, "Well, hold on a second. Like, to push it to that further level, to now, gain significant amount of muscle and get really, really lean, you can't just keep doing, these beneficial but relatively moderate habits. You're going to have to like crank it up a little bit more, it becomes exponentially more difficult, right? He was envisioning himself like sub 10% body fat and, putting on quite a bit of muscle. And he was like, really? Well, how come? So it just totally surprised him. So we got into a whole conversation about it. And after we had talked, Phil was like, man, I've never heard it described that way. Why don't we turn that into a content piece? So then Ryan Andrews and I talked and kind of come up with a concept, which was talking about that exact thing. But the reason we did it was because Carm was a perfect example of, well, if I just keep doing this little bit of these few things every day, I'm going to end up looking like, Ryan Reynolds on the cover of Men's Health. But conversely, there's the opposite story we often hear of people just starting out thinking they have to do all the things that Ryan Reynolds did to look like he did on the cover of Men's Health just to make some early progress, right? So there's like these two misconceptions because people don't tend to have a strong fundamental grasp of like how bodily change and overall just physical change occurs. So the whole intent was to show like, okay, if you're starting here and you want to get, just a little bit healthier, a little bit fitter to, do whatever, play with your kids, be able to go up a flight of stairs and not be winded, take your shirt off at the beach and feel confident. That doesn't require massive lifestyle overhaul and start living like someone who's paid to look a certain way has to live, right? But on the flip side, if you want to look like that dude, you've got to start doing like exponentially more than just those first starting fundamental habits. It becomes not just more consistent, but there's also a lot more things you have to either do more of or do less of to reach those points. So it was just kind of outlining the trade-offs so people go into it with their eyes wide open and they can kind of make that decision. Okay, this is the body I'd love to have, but this is the life I want to live, right? If those two things don't align, where do we find that common ground, right? Oh, I'd be happy with this body and I'd be happy with this kind of lifestyle. Cool, I'll work towards that setup. If they do align, man, then you just can go for it. But then you always adjust based on the actual outcomes that are happening. So too often we'd see people, I want to look like that. And they would start trying to live immediately like that person. And then shit would backfire, right? Like, man, this is crazy hard. F this, I'm done. I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing. Even if it's not consciously what they're thinking, it's what their subconscious actions show you, right? So instead, it's like, okay, what if we just lower the barrier to entry, man? Like, just take some simple first steps, and that'll kind of get you here. You like that? That feels good? Cool. You're in a healthy range. No, you're not a fitness model, but you're in a healthy spot. Oh, you want to do a little bit more? Cool. We can do that. All right. So just giving people an idea of what it takes to get to certain. We used body composition as like a proxy, but you could use the same concept for overall health and wellness for, pretty much anything. So it was really, it broke our servers. It was the most viewed piece we ever had.
That's so that was cost of getting lean, guys. Got to check it out. So do you find, in my experience, I found this, I'm curious if you find this as well. Most people are like they get 90+% of what they want out of just feeling like they're on the path of reaching a goal, right? Of feeling like they have integrity with themselves. I say I'm going to do X and I'm doing it rather than achieving a certain level of body fat. Now, there are certainly a number of people that are never satisfied until they look like the Instagram model or whatever it is. But most people are perfectly content just feeling like they're really taking care of themselves and they're progressing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, without question. I mean, you look at in our own coaching practice, I mean, we've coached or helped coach over 100,000 people at this point. And that's a theme we see over and over and over again. Some of our clients end up, you look at some of our transformations and they end up looking, absolutely incredible. A lot of people end up just looking good, right? They're not like, holy shit, that person's jacked or shredded, but they're healthy, they're happy, they have a better relationship with food. They just made some fundamental shifts in how they viewed things, right? So part of it is that mindset. And then they're relatively content with good enough because fitness is not their life, right? It kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. They're not exercising to get better at exercising, and they're not eating well just to be a great eater. They're doing those things to contribute to the whole tapestry of their life, if you want to get kind of a little woo out there. But ultimately it's because it's a means to an end to some degree. Like they like to exercise because it makes them feel good. It helps them do other things in their life better, that they enjoy. And it's the same thing with eating well. So oftentimes with clients like that, or who for that's their end goal, just starting on that process or working through that process is just as important as like the end result. And that's fundamentally actually what you hope to achieve, because it's kind of like learning, right? The goal isn't just to end up at some time point, oh, I've learned calculus, done, right? It's about the actual process of learning. That's just as important, if not more important, than the destination. So it's the same kind of thing with change, with behavior change.
So one of the biggest culprits, in my opinion, in the fitness industry, nutrition, in general, and this relates to the article, is social media, right? In fitness, especially, I feel like, I don't know about especially, but definitely in the CrossFit industry, which comprises a lot of the audience that is listening to the show. The biggest names and athletes are absolutely shredded, and those athletes work out 4 to 6 hours a day. Right?
Exactly.
Have a training history of 15 to 20 years. A lot of them were D1 athletes, or they've just been at it for a really, really long time. So I'm sure you see this a ton. So what do you think about the power of social media, and how do you help people overcome this so they're not setting goals that don't align with their values?
I mean, social media is a double-edged sword, man. And so I think people need to go into it. One of the things we try to help fitness professionals that we certify is to go into it with their eyes wide open, right? And so what I mean by that is, okay, when you're looking at like the top people in CrossFit, they're training 4 to 6 hours a day. You're right, most of them were already high-level athletes to begin with. So they already had a base level of training from their activities, but they also have a base level of high-quality movement from playing various sports growing up. They were already most likely preternaturally gifted athletes, and then they're training 4 to 6 hours a day. Like, their livelihood is training. They're paid and supported by, a lot of them, by their training. It's not something they do in addition to their regular job, right? So I think you can never discount that. When you are paid based on your performance or based on your physical appearance, you just have a different life circumstance than someone who trains 45 minutes to an hour a day 4 times a week. Right? Even if you're super into like training, most of us aren't training 4 to 6 hours a day. It's just not feasible with everything else you got going on. If you want to make a living, if you're doing it, whether you're doing it through training or you're doing it through nutrition coaching or a different career entirely. So I think it's critical to keep that in mind. You look at, oh, this is how I eat. Like you see, The Rock having a refeed day with like a stack of pancakes and a ton of syrup. And it's like, that dude trains like you would not believe, because part of the reason he's paid so much is because of his physical appearance. It's part of his shtick in some ways, right? Of being The Rock. So when you see the cheat day, but you're not seeing every other meal that's pretty meticulously planned out, all of the training that goes into it. So oftentimes you lose context, right? And so I think that's where social media can be problematic, and people can show their best selves. It's not like in real time, with a real person, where they stumble over their words, or people have an embarrassing moment, or they're sitting in an unflattering position. You can share only the best version of yourself. Right, you can Photoshop it, you can edit it, you can get good lighting. I mean, you see that's become a thing on Instagram, right? Where people show, this is what I look like sitting like this. This is what I look like, the perfect lighting. You're seeing a lot more of this intentional, here's what the real story is, or here's what real me. These are both real me, but one's with great lighting, perfect body position. One's with hunched over, bad lighting, and it looks like two totally different people. So people are often just showing this cultivated, branded image of themselves. And my problem with that is then for someone who's not paying close enough attention, it can seem like, man, this person's got everything. They got their shit together. Look how constantly jacked and ripped they are. They never have a bloated day, a bad day. Like, that's not true. Even the fittest, healthiest person has problems in their life and has shit that goes sideways and has days where they don't feel or look their best. Let alone like your quote unquote general average person. Even if you're a general average fitness person, you're going to have even more of that, especially in terms of like looks or performance, because you're not able to train 4 to 6 hours a day. So I think it's having clear expectations about what's being shared and how it's being shared and who it's coming from. Not that it should discredit their accomplishments or what they're sharing, but just know that their life circumstances and context is going to be different than yours or for your clients.
Right. So one of the things you guys are big on at PN is helping people find the diet that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
What about you personally? What diet works for you at this point in your life?
Keep it simple, stupid, man. I am a big, for me in particular, like I don't do intermittent fasting. I don't do anything overly complicated. Like at PN, look in our certification, we teach looking at people through different levels, right? So when you have a client, you would segregate them into a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3. Most people are level 1s who are coming in and just need to work on fundamental skills, right? Getting enough protein, eating enough vegetables, right? Having quality foods, eating slowly until satisfied. Whereas more advanced individuals, level 2, you're doing carb cycling. You can consider like intermittent fasting, things of that nature. Or level 3 would be like someone prepping for a photo shoot, right? You're doing water manipulation, all kinds of crazy things. I eat like a level 1 individual, like a knowledgeable and consistent level 1 individual, but nothing fancy. I get a adequate amount of protein, reasonable amount of carbs, plenty of veggies, and some healthy fats 4 times a day, right? I do it that way because, one, it works for my life circumstances and current goals. I also have 3 young kids, right? So part of me is also trying to teach them to have a healthy relationship with food. And I'm not sure a 4-year-old is going to understand the nuance of, well, daddy's fasting now, but not fasting at this time tomorrow. Or daddy's having carbs here, but not here because of X. Or you're eating this, but daddy's having this, right? So I try to find family-friendly meals that are still healthy for all of us, that still meet all of our taste preferences and needs, right? So I keep it generally very simple, very balanced, and try to include reasonable amounts of indulgences and things like that so that my kids can be fit and happy and healthy, but not feel deprived or go to a friend's house and be like, man, we never have that. And they just start cranking stuff down, right? So, there's always a little bit of figuring that out as you go. But yeah, man, like my personal intake it's pretty simple. Nothing overly complicated.
It sounds like you have a real ability to moderate yourself. Have you always been that way?
It's a good question. I don't know if I can say I've always been that way. Like when I was younger, first really kind of getting into this, like I touched on earlier, I ate like 8 times a day. I carb cycled. If there was an advanced strategy out there, I was into it. Mm-hmm. So no, I wouldn't say I really moderated back then, right? But I had a different perspective and different life circumstances, and I learned from that, right? I was no more fit and no stronger then than I am now, doing things much simpler, much more straightforward, right? For all of the fancy strategies and approaches and effort I put in to all of that, it didn't fundamentally make me better as a human being. And it didn't really even make me any better physically or performance-wise. Now, can I sit here and guarantee that if I didn't do any of those things, I would have gotten as strong and as fit as I did? No, of course not, because there was no control, right? I was just one person. But changing away from those things, I didn't lose that strength or that fitness. So, no, I wasn't always quite like that. But I've learned part of that was that meal with my then girlfriend, now wife, right? Like, hey, man, I can eat some potatoes and everything's going to be okay. So then I just started to kind of expand and explore on it from there. Like I just slowly, step by step, and discovered that being more moderate, at least for me and for a lot of my clients, not all, right? Some people do really great with super low carb, higher fat, and vice versa. Others do really well on super high fat, low carb, where you can still do it in a more moderate way, but it's a little harder to be moderate because you have to be more discerning when you eat, where you go, right? Social situations. Whereas when you eat more like I do, you have more flexibility there. But, to each his own. So it took me time, a lot of time, and practice to become more moderate, for sure.
Well, congratulations. I'm definitely still working on it, man.
Takes practice, man. It takes practice and a desire, right? I desired to be that way. If you don't desire to be that way, you don't have to be that way, until there's some kind of compelling need for you to be that way.
Right. So my wife and I are doing a 90-day keto experiment. We're going to start doing keto coaching at our company, and I am absolutely loving it. I love the constraint of I can eat that, I can't eat that, right? I typically do really well with constraints. I traditionally am terrible with moderation. Have battled addiction in my past and that whole thing. And so one of the things I'm worried, I definitely don't want to be keto forever. There are so many vegetables even that I can't have right now. And so I definitely, I want to have a more moderate diet at some point. And I'm a little bit worried about what happens when I don't have those black and white things of what I can and can't eat. And I think that's something that people deal with in so many types of diets, right? They'll have a period of time where they have a competition or a shoot or something. They're laser focused.
Specific timeline, right?
Exactly. And once they don't have that thing that they absolutely must perform at, then it becomes much, much more difficult. So how do you help people overcome temptations and maintain that level of adherence and moderation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think part of it is, like in our own coaching practice, we have a lot of lessons because we deliver coaching online, right? And we have biweekly habits people practice, and they get lessons to support those habits. And within those lessons, we ask like Socratic-based questions. Really, they're like thought exercises to help you personalize the habits to yourself, or how might you implement this, or to stretch you and challenge you. And a lot of them are geared towards this exact thing you're talking about, this kind of black and white or all or none mindset of, yes, for a while, it can be very helpful to have crystal clear rules, right? Where it's like, man, keto is easy because I don't have to make food decisions because carbs aren't even on the table, right? It's like, what protein and fat am I going to eat, right? That's a pretty relatively simple question to answer versus when you've got to kind of fill in every box. So, which can be a good and a bad thing, right? It can be a good thing for some people long term, and it can be a good thing for quite a few people short term. But you look at the research on, we'll just use keto as an example, like the success rate of keto for people to keep their carbs down, it doesn't happen over time on average, right? So research always reports averages, and that's critical for me to always point out because individual results will always vary. But on average, when you look at 1 to 2 year studies of keto, carb intake slowly just creeps up over time. The same thing happens on low-fat diets. Fat intake slowly creeps up over time. By the end of trials that compare the two that are super long-term, their intakes aren't tremendously dissimilar. Right? The low-carb people slowly trended back up in their carb intake. The low-fat people, their fat intake trended back up, and everyone on average ends up more in that zone, right, type intake where 30, 40, 30 kind of setup. Now, you're going to have people who stay on the various ones. But what we try to teach is we do experiments. People test things. They'll do a keto day. They'll do a fasting day just to see what it feels like. But ultimately, what we often get at is we ask questions about how does that feel for you? If you tried this, what would happen? Right? If you didn't change or you did change, what would be good about that? What would be bad about that? So we ask a lot of thought exercises because too often in coaching, we think I got to tell people what to do. That's not how humans really work, right? So that's when I first started coaching, it was, man, I have all this knowledge. I got to teach you all this shit, bro. Like, you got to do this and this and this, and you'll be golden. And then, and I'm a 22-year-old guy talking to a 40-year-old woman who has 3 kids and her own job and who has a 40-year history of trying different things and has a different life experience and different thought process on food than me. And they come back and be like, yeah, that didn't work for me. Like, what do you mean? You just got to do this and this and this. Come on, right? But then you start asking questions. Why didn't that work for you? Well, because of X, Y, and Z, or because this happens for me, or I have these work lunches. Like, man, I had never been taken out to a work lunch in my life at that point. Right? It wasn't even on my radar as a thing. So you realize people lead very different lives than you and have very different life circumstances. So you start to ask more questions. for your own knowledge. Then you realize you can start asking them questions to solve their own answers, right? So what would happen if you did this? What would that look like? So we get people to try things, to experiment, and oftentimes what they find is what we call like their owner's manual. So they'll end up finding all these things they can try. Oh, this worked for me. This didn't work for me. Like, man, I'm loving keto. I would love to do this for a while. So if I was your coach, I'd be like, cool, I can help you do that and do that well. But we're going to talk about what might it look like if you ever wanted to not do keto. How might that work for you? So I'm not going to give you answers. I'm going to ask you questions. Now, I'll give you feedback and suggestions, and we'll collaborate. It's not just you figure it all out and I'm just here to cheer you on. That's not the coaching either, right? So really, it's about working together to find common sense solutions for that person. So you do that by asking appropriate questions, by asking open-ended questions, and working as an actual team, and then just slowly trying things. Hey, man, what if we, for example, I remember I had clients who this guy was a big fan of meat and nut breakfast, but yet he was like 30 pounds overweight.
Poliquin.
Yes, right. Exactly. The old Charles Poliquin breakfast. So, but he was in our program because he was like 30 pounds overweight and he was frustrated, but he was like an evangelist of this approach. And yet it wasn't actually working for him. But in his mind, it should work. So he was telling my other clients to try it. And I was like, which I'm like, dude, that's fine if they want to play with it and see how it works for them. I'm like, but how is this working for you? He sat there and thought about it. And he's like, I don't know. What if we just tried something different? We can just try it for a week. You don't like it? We can go right back to, it's not like this is gone. Right? You come right back to your meat and nut breakfast. So then he tried having, I think he had like eggs and oatmeal with some fruit. Loved it. Felt really good. Slowly over time, started incorporating other things. So I gently challenged his preconceived notions or his self-limitations, right? He identified as a meat and nut breakfast guy. So challenging that was hard because that was like his identity. That's how he preached to other people. But we did it just by asking questions. Man, what would it look like if we did it differently, right? How's that working for you? What if we just tried this just for a few days and just see how it goes? So we just teach it as experimentation or play or just exploring other options because we can always come back to what you're doing before.
One thing that you're a proponent of is having people eat as much food as possible while still losing weight, given that their goal is to lose weight. Why is that?
Because keeping people satisfied is a key part of staying consistent on an intake, right? So you look at the research and what do they find is like the key things to successfully losing weight and keeping it off? It's following an intake that you can follow consistently over time, regardless of whether it's keto or Mediterranean, vegan. None of those things really matter in the aggregate. What matters is finding an approach that you enjoy and can consistently follow. So in order to do that, though, food has to be, that approach has to be foods that you like and are willing to eat and things that keep you satisfied. We know hunger is a real challenge during weight loss because the body responds to weight loss as if, man, bad shit's happening, right? So it cranks up hunger hormones, it decreases your satiety hormones, it'll decrease your like NEAT output, so your spontaneous movement. It's not trying to stop you from like looking good. It's viewing this as a threat to survival, right? Because historically, that's what it really was. Way back when, if you didn't have enough food intake, it was a threat to your survival and your progeny and the human race, essentially, the human species. So that's how our mechanisms still work. So if you can eat as much food as possible while still making progress, that's going to help ensure you don't feel deprived. You're still feeling satisfied between meals. You're still going to have some level of hunger when you're losing weight because you're in a calorie deficit, right? But if we can mitigate that as much as possible, that'll make the process as easy as it can be. So that's one of the reasons why we emphasize protein and we emphasize veggies, right? Protein is the most satiating of all the macronutrients. So it keeps you as fuller longer between meals. Evidence shows people eat more protein, they'll eat fewer calories without feeling hungrier. Right? Veggies are also really good at filling you up during meals. They provide satiation, whereas protein provides satiety. Two different mechanisms. Satiation is how full you feel during a meal. Satiety is how full you feel between meals. So veggies are really good at providing a lot of volume with few overall calories, right? So we'll emphasize those. Then you fill in the rest with carbs and fats based on your preferences. But you eat them only until you're satisfied. But ultimately, you'll see people who will drastically drop their intakes, want to lose weight faster. Well, you can only lose so much body fat at a time. So what you're going to do is you're going to lose a lot of water at first, which is going to feel great. Then you're going to start eating into lean mass, right? There's a rate limiting impact. Like 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week is considered a safe, healthy, possible rate of loss without hopefully not seeing as much of a metabolic downturn, right? The adaptation component, and not eating into muscle mass, lean mass, bone mass, that kind of thing, right? So if we can eat as much as we can while still making that kind of progress, you're maximizing your fat loss benefits while keeping things as sane and sustainable as possible.
And that goes back to what we were talking about before the show. Like, so many people want to adopt a diet. They want to get on a diet for 90 days, for 6 months, and then just be done with the diet, right? Lose the weight, get to that level of body composition, and then they want to be done with it and go back to normal. But if you want to maintain that for any amount of time, then you have to adopt a different lifestyle. You have to adopt a different nutrition philosophy that you're going to use past 6 months. Right. And that's what you guys are really doing, is helping people ease into it so they become automatic behaviors and habits.
Exactly. It's about, part of it's skill building, right? We're really teaching our fundamental skills that can be applied regardless of what your dietary preferences are. Whether you're paleo, vegan, keto, the skills we teach are things that can be applied to do any of those approaches well. And it's also about mindset, right? How you view food. So we talk about improving relationship with food, and you'll see, like, when you look at every 6 months, right? People finish 1 year of the course because it launches twice a year. And you'll see that we have these great physical transformations, but when we interview the people who do really well, they almost never talk about their body changing. Right? They talk about, man, I feel like my whole life has changed. My outlook on X, Y, and Z has changed. I view food differently. I came to really understand, we talk about, nutrition is not. It's not even mostly about food, nutrition coaching. It's the actual relationship, the emotional behavior change. And by the end, they're like, they become evangelists for that because they see how much it impacts the way we coach everything else in their life, and how the food was secondary, right? They weren't just eating hot dogs because they liked hot dogs. It was often because it was used as a coping mechanism, or it was, based on some other type of identity or a value or belief system that they held. So we get into those things. And then ultimately, along with the other habits we're teaching, the specific nutrition habits we're teaching, the food will resolve itself. That sounds kind of like too high level, I guess, or too meta. We do get into food, right? We talk about protein and veggies and carbs and fats. We have specific habits on that. But what we're really talking about with nutrition coaching is people's mindsets around food. To not view food as just like a set of numbers or like these boxes to check off, right? To actually enjoy food as something that it's a communal experience oftentimes, right? When you have something to celebrate, what do? You go to dinner with people, right? We use food as an expression of a lot of different things. And too often in the fitness world, I feel like it gets broken down into math. And as a former engineering major, I love math. Like, math is, to this day, I bring a lot of math to the table at PN. But there are limitations to viewing food as simply numerical inputs. Right. So if you're paid to look a certain way, yeah, man, you gotta do some level of math to eat, because every little bit matters. But for most of our clients, that's just not the case, right? Being 12% or 12.5% body fat makes no noticeable difference in their everyday life. So it's not important. What is important is coming up with a way for that person, for them to feel confident and comfortable and to enjoy eating. Right. So I think that's a key piece that's often overlooked in the fitness industry.
So one way of going about teaching that sort of thing is noticing all of these deficits or weaknesses in people's mindsets and telling them you need to do this and this and that, right? You already started to speak about this. I know that you guys use motivational interviewing. Can you talk about, so that's the other way of approaching it. What can you explain that to people, and how do you use that in a remote setting?
The biggest thing is, motivational interviewing, or MI, is one tool that we use, right? It's one coaching approach. Really, the thing with MI is the whole point of it is to be a collaborator with the person that you're working with rather than a dictator. Rather than like telling them what to do, you're asking them questions, giving suggestions, and then you work together to find reasonable actions that they can follow and try and test. And so, doing it online, it's in some ways it's easier to do in person, right? Because I can see nonverbal cues. Having a conversation, I can see you nod your head. I can see you shift your weight. I can see you look fidget and uncomfortable with something. So it's a little more challenging to do online because we don't get that component, right? A lot of it's through written word. So it's about asking really good questions. And so open-ended questions, making sure you're reflecting back what you're hearing, and really trying to, what we teach as a coach is like a guide to a city you already live in. So let's say you live in Boston, right? Sometimes like you think, oh, I know the city really well. Then you go on a city tour and you're like, holy shit, I never even knew that building was there. Well, that's a really cool landmark I didn't even know existed, right? So that's what a coach is. A coach is like a tour guide to a city you already live in. You already know a lot of things about yourself, but they can help point out things that you have blinders on or aren't aware of, right? And it's one of the ways we do that. Like, yes, you can point out what we would call limiting factors, areas you are struggling or need help with. If you're drinking 5 sodas a day, that's an obvious limiting factor, right? But a bigger area we actually look at is what we call superpowers or bright spots, things people already do really well. How can we leverage more of that? That's one of the most important things we do in our coaching is, man, this person's already getting in protein at every meal. Why? Right? So rather than just saying, hey, you're getting protein, let's get some veggies there too. Like, no, let's unpack that. Why are you able to get protein in all those meals? Why is it you can be so consistent with that habit? Oh, because I, food prep my chicken, or I, get a meal delivery service, or it could be any number of things. I like to barbecue chicken on the weekends. Whatever the answer is, we can now leverage that. Oh man, could we add in, a little bit of some veggies with that? While you're prepping the chicken, could you do X, Y, or Z? Or how do you think you could, tack veggies onto that food prep skill you already have? Or you're super organized. You can leverage organized people to do lots of things with food prep, right? So look at skills they already have, and oftentimes they're unrelated, right? Oh, they're super skilled at something in their job, but don't see how that translates to eating better. So you got to help them find those connections, because usually people who can afford coaching are probably successful in some other aspect of life. So that means they have some skill set somewhere that you can find that translates into eating better, being more fit, what have you. They often just don't see the connection.
Right.
So we look for those superpowers and bright spots. What are you already doing well, and how can we do more of that? All right, and then we find, oh, okay, we did this. We had assigned this veggie habit we discussed about. You talked about how you could do it, have a veggie at every meal. You're having veggies at 2 meals a day. Well, how come? On the meals you were able to have veggies, what was different than the meals where you couldn't, right? So we're always looking for, when you were successful here, why? What led to that success? And how can we replicate more of that rather than why did you fail here, right? Let's focus on what you're already doing well and doing more of that rather than overly focusing on. We'll still look at struggles, of course. We don't ignore them, but it's more like an 80-20 bright spots to limiting factors.
That's awesome. You're protecting and maintaining a level of confidence. What usually happens in coaching is we get so focused on what they're doing wrong or could do that's the constant focus, and that just kind of deteriorates confidence, right?
Absolutely. And it deteriorates the coaching relationship, right? And what's interesting is you look at we're not therapists, but you can look to the therapy world for a lot of insight in how to coach well, or you can steal some of their approaches. So you look at therapy and what leads to successful therapeutic outcomes. Honestly, the answer is something called the therapeutic alliance, which is essentially a fancy name for how strong of a coach-client relationship we have. How trusting are you of me, right? That's responsible for about 85% of the results of therapy, whether they use MI or CBT or play therapy or whatever the approach is or a combination of approaches. If you don't trust your therapist, it doesn't matter, right? If you don't have a strong relationship where you can speak honestly and transparently, it doesn't matter. So it's really about having a strong connection. And part of the way you do that is by your approach, right? The way you ask questions, the way you point things out. If you're telling them, man, you're drinking way too much soda, you don't have nearly enough veggies, there's way too much fried food, I just feel like a failure out of the gate. And it's like, wow, now on my next food log, I'm just not going to show you some of this shit. Right? I just leave that out so I don't feel as embarrassed next time. So then you've already created a sense of It's not no longer like a safe space where I can talk to you about real shit that's happening. And I know it sounds kind of fuzzy but in reality, I mean, humans don't like to be embarrassed, right? Especially adults. We definitely have concerns, especially in areas where we're already maybe not super confident in. So let's build on that confidence. Let's point out things you're already doing well and how can we do more of them. Another way of doing it is to reframe, right? People will come to you and be like, I've been dieting since 1997. I've tried everything under the sun and everything just fails. Okay, that's one way of looking at it, right? But you can point out, you know what that says to me? What I'm hearing is someone who's super resilient, right? Who has, regardless of how many times they feel like they failed, they've picked themselves back up again and taken another crack at it. Like, that shows incredible strength and resilience and willingness to bounce back up. And that's super important for this kind of thing. And oftentimes you see people will be like, wow, never thought of myself that way, right? Mm-hmm. Never thought of myself as resilient because I always fell down. Yeah, but you always got back up and you tried again. So reframing things goes a super long way. And I mean, there's lots of strategies and skills that we teach to do this. Those are just two of them right there, right? Focusing on bright spots, using reframing. Other MI techniques are similar. There's a whole bunch of them. But ultimately, it's rebuilding someone's confidence or keeping their confidence is one of the most important things you can do as a coach, not just pointing out the things they could do better.
What other insights have you and your team had about the art of coaching that's had a big impact on you as a coach?
Here, I'll tell you one that comes to top of mind. So, I've been coaching for quite a long time, actually, before I came to PN, probably a good 5 or 6 years. And thought I was, pretty well versed in coaching. And then I got to meet, JB and Dr. Krista Scott Dixon and all kinds of other colleagues at PN who have contributed their wisdom. One of the first things or most important things I learned from Krista and from JB by extension was that nearly all human behavior is an attempt to solve a problem. So when you start looking at things through that lens, you stop looking at a food log and judging people for having 3 glasses of wine at night. Instead, you sit there and I wonder why they're having 3 glasses of wine at night. What is that doing for them? It's providing something, some type of benefit, whether it's transient or temporary, most likely, but it's providing them some type of benefit to solve something else, right? It's usually to resolve pain or guilt or stress, shame, you name it, right? Stress is a huge one. Why do people smoke? Right? Oftentimes they might quit smoking, something super stressful happens, they start smoking again because smoking helps to alleviate that stress, right? It's a solution to a problem. Not a great solution. It's actually a pretty terrible one, but it's providing an immediate solution. So when you start looking at people's intakes or their approaches to things, when you start looking at things through that lens, you realize, well, why are they doing this? Well, because it makes sense to them in some way, shape, or form, whether consciously or not. It's providing some type of solution. So if you just see that, they have 3 glasses of wine at night, man, we should just take that away. You just got to stop drinking. One, good luck with that as an approach. But 2, when you remove that, now whatever problem that was solving is probably still there, and you've removed that solution. So if you don't provide some other type of better solution or help them build skills along the way, like stress reduction skills, stress management, resiliency, oftentimes if you do build those things, you see some of these poor habits, we'll call it, resolve themselves because they no longer need that solution. They have better ones. So looking at things through that lens, through that framework was mind-blowing for me as a coach. Why is this person consistently having, a burger and fries and a Coke at lunch, sitting in their car, even though we've talked about it? Because they hate their job and they go and get fast food and they sit in their car because it's a relief, it's an escape from their current circumstances. So until you understand why they're doing some of those things, right? Instead of judging, he's having another burger and fries again, right? Wow, this is probably there's a reason why this person keeps doing this. Let's explore that, right? Unpack that. Ask gently with compassion why that is. It'll help you tremendously as a coach. When they start sharing that, you can come up with a million different ways to do that differently or better. Or could we try doing this instead? Could we go to Subway? Is it great? No. But is it a step in the right direction? Yes. Right. There are lots of different things you can do from there. But until you know why they're doing the things they're doing, you can't help them do them differently very well.
Brian, that's the best thing I've heard all day, man. What if all of us went through our lives treating every person we met that way?
Yeah, I think it would be a very different national discourse right now.
We solve all of the world's problems.
Politics would be a lot different. I can tell you that.
That's amazing, man. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely, dude. It was career altering for me, life altering in many ways.
And it may be for me. I've never heard it put that way. Thank you. So you're super big on habit design and just getting people to stick with simple habits. How do you ride the fine line between meeting someone where they are or giving them enough to stay engaged so that they're not bored, but they're not pushed further than they're capable of or ready for?
Yeah, no, you're basically trying to find that line of like, it's like that stress sweet spot, right? When you're not stressed enough, it's like inertia. You don't have enough to do. You end up doing even less than you needed to do because you're just sitting on your ass. Right? When you have too much to do, you feel like you're spinning your wheels. You end up quitting because it's too stressful. You want to find that middle road where it's like just pushing you outside your comfort zone, but not pushing you so far where it freaks you out and you give up or you feel like a failure. So the way we do it, part of it is through, we have specific habits everyone gets to do. Then they have the owner's manual that helps them like personalize those things to themselves. We also do experiments to kind of really push the boundaries. Like I think I talked about before, hey, we have a fasting experiment, a whole foods only day, right? Man, you got to figure that out. Are you eating whole foods only? That means like no ketchup. That means no croutons. That means like legitimately unprocessed whole foods, which is actually a bigger challenge than you might think. You might think, oh, I eat really well. But you start pulling out everything that means no protein powder, right? Like no bars.
Probably no salad dressing that you buy from the store.
Right? Exactly. You'd have to make your own. And it's just a one-day experiment. But people are always like blown away. Like, wow, this was really hard, but also really fun. I got to try doing this and I tried that and I actually realized how much I liked having avocado on my salad. There could be any number of things that people wouldn't have normally tried, but you treat it as a time-boxed experiment, right? So they know this is a finite thing. I'm really pushing my boundaries for this day. And they're already thinking they're going to go back to their usual thing once they're done. But oftentimes what ends up happening is they go back to most of their usual thing with some new cool things they're trying and doing differently because they learned some fun lessons from doing the experiment. So part of the way we also do this is we always assess like how ready, willing, and able a client is to do something. So we have a scale on 1 to 10. Let's say we talk through some actions. I asked you some open-ended questions. You came up with some ideas. I said, okay, well, here are some things I've seen work for people in a similar situation. What do you think about this? We put our minds together. We come up with a next action of, you're going to eat 1 pound of protein 3 times a day, 3 meals a day for the next week. And then I'll ask you, okay, we've come up with this. How ready, willing, and able are you to make that a reality? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to make that possible? Probably an 8. I mean, ideally, we're looking for a 9 or a 10. I'm not saying this to the client, but we're looking for a 9 or 10. If we're not getting a 9 or a 10, you want to shrink that down until something's really doable. So if they give you an 8 or anything lower, you're like, okay, how can we make this more doable for you? Is 2 meals a day, 1 meal a day? Right? Where can we make it so that we can now build upon? Right? So because success breeds success. So we ask those ready, willing, and able questions. How ready are you? How willing are you? And how able are you to implement this as we talked about? Looking for those 9s out of 10s. So if you get that, that's telling you they're pretty confident they can make it happen. Right? But if you're just getting 10s, oh, that's super easy. Sometimes people find it's not pushing them enough. That's where you can do experiments, or we can tend to, okay, well, if that's so easy, what if we tried X, Y, or Z? But again, you're still framing it as like, we're going to do this for a week and we're going to see how it goes. And we're going to regroup and kind of do a retrospective, like what worked, what didn't work, how can we do more of what did work? So I think it's this having an open line of communication and dynamically steering, like being ready, as the coach, being ready, willing, and able to change whatever you're working on at a moment's notice. Hey, man, this isn't working out for me because of X, Y, Z, right? So, okay, maybe we shrink it. Maybe we go to a different habit altogether, right? Protein thing might just be too challenging right now, or there's too many other things where we didn't do before we got into that. Let's back up, right? Let's talk about meal prep, or let's talk about anything else you can come up with that might be a better fit right now. It might leverage a skill that you didn't know they had that got brought up in conversation. So ultimately, we do that ready, willing, and able, assess, make sure you get the 9 out of 10 so that it's doable. But then we also, within that, as we go along, push boundaries and do experiments and explore and try things. So what if we tried this for a week, right? See how that goes. Might push their boundaries a little bit. What if we tried to up your consistency to like 90%? It's been about 80, 75 to 80, and you really want to get to this weight loss goal for your wedding. What if we try upping that to 90% for a week? Think that's doable for you? Yeah. So it's going to push them outside their comfort zone a little bit. And when we see how it goes, and we're ready to either help them do that more or always have an escape plan and change direction if we feel like it's making them feel uncomfortable or they're going to feel like failures, right? There's lots of reasons for it. But
yeah, and there's obvious value in that in the nutrition world and as a nutrition coach. And my mind's just lit up with how I can use that model in so many areas of life. I think I might take that and say anytime I speak negatively throughout the day, just a 1-day experiment to start out. If I speak negatively for a day or any time throughout the day, I owe 20 burpees on the spot, something like that.
And then maybe even add something to it, right? And then how can I reframe it positively? Like say that in mind, so that the next day you're hoping to make more and more of those reframed positively and fewer. So it's not just the punishment. There's also so how could I have said this differently and better, right? So you're using two different, the carrot and the stick.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. So in closing, if you could just infuse or zap every one of your nutrition clients with a laser beam and put a certain belief or mindset in their heads about life, about nutrition, what would that be?
Honestly, it would probably be that just showing up matters. So I'll actually take it back to math here for a second. Interestingly, we did some analysis of our clients over the years, and we looked at various levels of consistency with our habits and workouts to see what kind of results people got in various consistency categories. Because we always talk about only do what you can in the circumstances presented to you. We talk about dial concepts and continuums and spectrums, and right, because that's what we've seen in our experience. This was the first time we actually looked at really definitive data on this topic, and it was really interesting to see how well it lined up with our own coaching experience, which was that even if people are less than 50% consistent with the habits and workouts in our program, they still make progress. So at the end of the year, they still lose 5 to 6% of their body weight, which doesn't sound like a ton, but when you look at the research, when you hit that 5% weight loss threshold, you significantly decrease risk for diabetes, heart disease, cancer. You see libido improve, you see sex hormones go up. All kinds of good stuff happens. That's a key threshold. And that's at less than 50%. So even if you can't be perfect, right? You can't even get in 80 to 90% of what you're hoping to do. Get in what you can when you can, right? Life goes sideways for a time and you can't get in your normal 4 workouts a week. Get in 2 15-minute body weight workouts. Doesn't matter, man. Is it 100% of what you were doing? It's not even probably 50% of what you were doing. It's still moving you forward, or at the very least, helping you tread water until things settle down. And we also saw, in the data, the more you put in, the more you get out, right? The more consistent you can be. It was actually pretty linear, less than 50, between 50 and 80, 80 to 90, and 90 to 100. People saw better and better results in each section, which probably isn't overly surprising. But I think the key takeaway for me was always be doing something. Even if you can't be locked in, killing it, it doesn't matter. Yeah, okay, of course I'd reach my goal faster if I was able to do that. But I'm still pushing that boulder forward, even if I'm 40, 50, 60% of what I'd normally able to do. So always do whatever is within your power to do within reasonable limits. So I think that's such an empowering thought process when you think about it, because oftentimes it feels like I've got to be exercising 4 times a week and doing this to be healthy and fit. And that's not what we've found. If you're again getting paid to look a certain way, yes. But for your clients who just want to be fitter and healthier and feel better to help them do other things in their life, yeah, is 40% consistency going to get them exactly where they want to be? Probably not. But it's a start. It's moving them in the right direction, and then you can build on it from there. How can we now help you be 50% or 60%, right? Just push those comfort zones a little bit. Or if you're normally 80 and stuff goes sideways, don't go to zero, man. Like just getting in whatever you can is going to still keep you moving forward or helping you tread water. And we have definitive data to prove it. It's not just some inspirational theory or ideological, view. It's both. It's our opinion, and we have facts.
Amazing advice, man. John and I had a similar conversation several months ago, and it literally changed my life. He said he has defined up front the least amount of effort he can put into all of the meaningful areas of his life and still feel successful.
Mm-hmm.
What's the least amount I need to work out per week? What's the least, like the most flexible I can be with my diet? What's the least amount of time I can even spend with my kids and still feel connected to them and like I'm showing up as a parent? And not that he's ever intending to spend the least amount, but what is the least amount he can spend when things are stressful and just life happens? And man, it changed my life. I've been so much more consistent in every habit in my life. And I was thinking about it last night, actually. I was giving myself a hard time because I couldn't go to train jujitsu. And then I reminded myself, no, you told yourself 3 times a week is your minimum, and you're still going to get that in. I went from stressed and kind of in a negative state to present with my wife and feeling good about life. And
Right.
It's such a powerful outlook.
Absolutely, man. How can we get rid of that guilt, right? So, I mean, it's kind of like a play on the Pareto principle. What's the 20% I can do to give me the 80% of the results, right? So same kind of idea. Like, if I can at least do this, I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, like if there are going to be times you can get in 4 sessions or more, right? There'll be times you can spend maybe most of the time JB's hoping to spend 3 hours a day with his kids, but if he can at least get 1 hour, he feels pretty good, right? Whatever those what we call BAMs, bare ass minimums, can be, right? Just aim to do at least that. If you can do that, man, then you're feeling good. If you can get more, and it's just gravy on top, but it's not required. It's a bonus, right? It's like an indulgence. But if you can at least get in, whatever those minimums are, absolutely. It's the same kind of concept, just framed in a different way, but I love it, right? And I haven't never really quite thought about it that way or so systematically approached it. Okay, what's the least amount of time I can spend with my kids? It sounds like a shitty question, right? What's the least amount of times? But it's not. It's really more of a thought exercise on what's the minimum I could do that at least make me feel good about my interaction with my kids.
Yes. One of the most useful times that this comes into play for me is during travel, right? Usually I want to spend 20 minutes doing yoga, 20 minutes meditating. Like I have a 90-minute routine. Traveling, that just doesn't happen. So if I can get 25 minutes and I haven't run into a scenario yet that I couldn't find 25 minutes throughout my day, then I'm still feeling like I'm centered. I'm taking care of my mental health and just life, and that experience alone is just so much better.
Oh yeah. And I think a key corollary to that is there might even be times where you haven't experienced yet where you can't get that in.
Right.
But you also know, you know what, man, like if it was such a crazy day I couldn't even get that in, then it was just a day where it was not meant to be. And you clean your slate and you move on because you're making every effort possible to make it happen. And if it couldn't happen that day, it just was one of those days, and you just get right back to your same thought process the next day, because it can be too easy to then be this cycle of feeling crappy about it. And so now I got to get in twice that amount of time tomorrow to make up for it. Like, no, forget the make up for it part, man. Like, just get back to your same approach the next day. That's why it makes great athletes so great. Like the best golfers, they get over bad shots and they're just focusing on the next shot. So it's the same thing we try to teach our clients. Like, forget the bad days. They happen. Let it go. Focus on the next day. Focus on the meal in front of you, right? Only focus on what you can control, which is your actions right now, not on what you can't, which is what happened yesterday.
Incredible, man. Brian, this has been a real pleasure. Where can people keep up with you personally and see more about what you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the best place would be precisionnutrition.com, right? I'm always writing content for the blog, and I'm a co-author on our certifications. Behind the scenes, I also I lead our team of coaches and our coaching strategy. So any type of interaction you have with PN, I've touched part of it, whether that's through coaching, certification, our pro coach software, on the blog, you name it, my hands are in it in some degree. So For my own personal stuff, like, I'll be frank with you, I'm not on social media because to meet my minimums of exercise and family time and work time, I can't make that a reality.
Doesn't fit in.
Right? For me. So for me, it doesn't fit in. But if you want to see more of my work, precisionnutrition.com, that's the place to go. That's where I contribute everything, work related or professional related. So it's all there, man. Check it out.
Excellent, man. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hey guys, if your biggest goal right now is to lose body fat and or build lean muscle mass, then we have something cool for you. And it is called, wait for it, the Brute Body Shred Manual. I know it's a super cool title. So this is a short ebook that includes 27 different tips on building lean muscle mass and losing body fat. It includes a 6-week pull-up progression, some different programming for building lean muscle. We have fat loss myths in here. We talk about how to eat for body composition goals and a ton of different things that you can implement immediately, or just things that are kind of mindset shifts that can help you reach your goals over the long term. And you can get access to this by going to brutestrengthtraining.com/SM, brutestrengthtraining.com/SM. And this is a free guide. Take advantage of it. Hope you enjoy.
This episode is finished, but your training journey continues. Head over to brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW and grab your free pack of 32 accessory workouts that you can incorporate into your training and start improving your strength immediately. That's brutestrengthtraining.com/SSW.